Hi, I'm Sara Blau, host of the Optimizing Mother podcast. Today, I'm here with a good friend, Yael Trusch, who is a money coach and a host of the award-winning podcast, Jewish Money Matters. Yael, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hello, Sarah. It's so good to be here. Yes, you just said it. I am a money coach. I'm the host of the Jewish Money Matters podcast. I help women, Jewish women and couples really address their relationship with money and their money management skills so that they do it from a place of clarity and confidence. And obviously, I want to stress the word Jewish because, not only are my students and my clients Jewish, but the focus of the type of work that we do always has a Jewish underpinnings to it. So it's not just money coaching and money management in the traditional sense, but there is a lot of the implementation of the paradigms that are aligned with our tradition and our faith.
So tell me a little bit more about that. What does it look like? Jewish, spiritual, money matters. What does that mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I like to, for people to always understand is that just like there's a way for us to think about marriage or work or parenting or intimacy or everything that we do in life, right? Judaism addresses. There's everything. There's not one area of your physical life and existence is not addressed by Judaism. And just like very often through the generations and the time that we've been in exile, we kind of start seeing things from a prism or a paradigm that is foreign to Judaism, that is not really aligned with the blueprint that God set out for us. Very often we see that happens with money, with our financial life. It's almost like there's a disconnect, right? And so a lot of what we try to do is bring back the Jewish perspective into how we view money, how we think about it, how we speak about it, and how we act with it, how we manage it. So a lot of people think, oh, well, money management has to do with dollars and cents. It's not just dollars and cents and spreadsheets and calculators. There's a whole mindset that we start with, right? And a way of speaking that then has to impact our behaviors, right? And there's certain things that we do as Jews that are not necessarily what traditional personal finance would say. For example, classic personal finance would say there are 4 ways to allocate your money. You can save it, invest it, spend it, and give it, right? That's norm. Everybody knows that. Well, that last one that I mentioned, give it, is usually the last one because that's what makes financial sense, right? You take care of your savings, your investing, your spending. And then if you have left over, please, by all means, we have to be generous people. Let's give. Judaism flips that entire financial paradigm on its head. We Jews give first. We first give, then we save, invest, and then we spend. So even with that premise, right? And of course, we can get into the foundation of it all, which is our trust in the source of the money, right? And why is that money? Why do we have a relationship with money, right? So there's so much that we have to kind of like change in our mindset to get to the practical. So it goes back to those Torah fundamentals, so the Jewish fundamentals.
So this is the Optimizing Mother podcast, and the emphasis here is on mother and on education and on chinuch. Can you share some stories and insight how we have the Yiddishe perspective of, like you mentioned, bitachon and finances, and how do we give that over practically besides for Meiser? How do we give over this Yiddishe perspective to our children when it comes to finances?
I love that question. Yes, absolutely. And I think this is so, so important because again, it all starts with the modeling, right? Like how do we speak at home about money, how to behave with money. That's what our kids are going to be absorbing. They're learning from you. Our parents are our number one teachers, even if we're not teaching them explicitly. So better if we start teaching them explicitly and also implicitly. And I think one of the best ways to start is first work on your relationship with money. And how are you speaking about money at home? What do you say when people knock and ask for charity, right? How do you receive them? Do your kids know that you give Meiser? Do you have a Meiser account and you're open about it? There's no reason to be shy about these things. Like this is not the time to be modest. Our children need to know that this is a value. If it's a value, it means we're putting our money where our values are. It means it's something we practice, right? How do we model that our trust in God, albeit it might be a work in progress, it is something that we're working on. How do we talk to our husbands? Do our kids know that we have certain times during the week or the month where we actually sit together and make intentional decisions about our money? What I like to call a money date. These, and like when their kids ask us for certain things, we can say, Mommy and Tati are going to be discussing that in our next money date, right? And we are not always in this reactionary mode, but rather with intentionality. And we can speak open, like it's an open conversation at home. There's no shame. Oh yeah, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to get back to you. And then we can openly say, for example, what are the things that we as a family, as a couple are choosing to spend on, to invest on, right? So a lot of the times I see in my practice, in my coaching practice, the pressure to say yes to kids who maybe are used to a certain lifestyle. And now parents are trying to readdress how they've been managing this financial area of their lives. And of course, it's going to trickle into our children because as we're adopting new value systems, that's going to affect everything, right? So how do we have these conversations with our children and without them feeling like, oh, now they're just saying no? Well, it's not we're saying no. We are actually people who make decisions from a place of thought, like we take our time to think about them, right? And this is not aligned with our values. Or how about we're choosing to spend differently this time, but that's a great idea. Or how about, you know what? I really like that. It's definitely aligned with our family's values. However, because we've decided this year that we're all going to Israel as a family, maybe I can meet you halfway there on that expense. Or maybe it's a no, but the conversations need to be happening rather than us just reacting out of fear of what our kids are going to think or what is our spouse going to think or our in-laws going to write. There has to be at home like an open, fluid communication, meaning in our tradition, money is not taboo. It's not meant to be taboo. And so if we're making it into a taboo thing, where husband and wife are not openly communicating about it, which means that you and your children are probably not communicating openly and transparently about it because everything starts with the parents, right? Then something in the paradigm is already wrong because it should be a beautiful, open conversation where these things are happening. There's no shame in telling your children, we're choosing to invest in this and not in that. We're choosing to give to this organization and not that. And where are you giving your money? I just gave you Hanukkah geld. Let's discuss where this miser is going. Boom. Yeah, it's not an option. It's something that we do as a family. Just like Tati and Mommy do it, the kids do it, right? I
love it. It's so interesting because when you talk about comparing each purchase to a value, then you actually have to have your value system.
Exactly.
You actually have to be thoughtful. How important is it to spend on clothing, on brand names? You actually have to say what's important. For example, chinuch is important. This is where we want to spend, on education. Or how important is it, whether it's renovating the house? You suddenly have to know what is your value.
And you have to talk about it. You can't
right. You have to talk about it. Yeah. You remember we got very excited when we saw that story written up of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Do you want to share it? That I felt was like, Yael, you need to hear this story.
Yes.
And you had just seen it.
And you sent it to me. I think so. That's how it started. And I just wrote about it for Chabad.org for my column. And basically it's a tiny story that comes up in Likutei Devarim. And when I read it, and I think it was you who sent it to me, I was like, there's so much here. It talks about, the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about when he was 11 years old, how basically he had to make certain financial decisions. His parents allowed him to have money, which is already a lesson in itself. How many of us are just letting our kids swipe our credit card or use our Apple Pay or whatever that might be, right? There's a disconnect, right? So he had money that his parents were giving him for learning Mishnayos. Oh, wow. What an incentive to learn Torah. What a lesson in and of itself. Much better than a toy or gadget, right? And it also, he tells that his mother, apparently for other reasons, also gave him pocket money. He talks about the fact that sometimes it was harder for his parents to give them money because the financial situation was tight. There's an awareness, there's communication, there's transparency. What did this child do with this money? Incredible. He had a free loan fund. He had a charity organization. He would lend out money to other Yidden. Where did he learn that? Evidently, we go back to understand who his parents were, right? His parents were people who took care of the physical and spiritual needs of others. So again, this was modeled at home. It was only natural that that value system was being passed down. And this is what the child did. The Frierdiker Rebbe talks about also how he had to make decisions with his money. So he wanted two things in the story. He wanted to purchase Sephorim and he wanted to purchase a gold watch. Because Sephorim, evidently, we understand it was Torah learning, but a watch would help him be on time and be mesudar with his time. What a beautiful concept. However, he calculates like any adult would be able to calculate if they've been given the practice, right? That at this given time, he doesn't have enough for both. But when his loans come due, he's going to have enough for one of them. Which one should he invest in first? Do you understand what a child is doing? He's already practicing everything you and I, Sarah, do on a constant basis. We make decisions how we are going to allocate our money because not every time we can have everything that we want at the same time, right? We're constantly making these decisions. So we're seeing that at a very young age, our children are capable and should be trained to make these decisions. And he goes about the whole thought process, how he decides to buy the watch because he can borrow Sephorim in the meantime. Not only that, the last thing he says in that story is he had a big disappointment because it so happened that his loan, whatever loan it was going to be, didn't get repaid. And somehow he ended up not having enough money at some point to buy one of the things that he wanted to buy or invest on. And we see again such a powerful lesson, right? It's okay for our kids to be disappointed sometimes, right? It's okay to start training them in real life. That might happen. That's going to happen. So there's so much here that we can learn as parents from the allowing our kids to have money so that they can make decisions on their own now when the stakes are so much lower, right? From the way they think about allocating their money. Why they get it in a reward for some beautiful spiritual achievement or accomplishment. And we can think as parents, what would that be for us? What they're going to buy and what they're going to do. They're going to have a charity fund. They're going to invest in certain things and they can handle disappointment. So there's so much that when I read this story, I said, I need to write about this because I, as a mother, feel like there's so much here. And interestingly enough, the response from parents has been like amazing. Like how, you know what I mean? Like to think that at such an early age, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, are we modeling these types of things for our children? Are we allowing them to make decisions, to have their own money, and guiding them through, the process of how we make the decisions without imposing, but asking the questions, modeling first, like his parents modeled, right?
Right. So I was wondering like this, you mentioned before about having money dates and making conscious and thoughtful and intentional decisions about, I guess being calculated. Do I want to spend here or do I want to spend here? And like taking the income and deciding, where do I want to allocate it? The question is, how do I balance that with educating my child to have bitachon in Hashem or the concept of l'chatchila riber and not being so super calculated? So, if it boils down to spreadsheets and details, how do you also give them that big picture l'chatchila river attitude?
Absolutely. So let's just clarify that it doesn't boil down to spreadsheets and it being calculated. It boils down to being mindful with one of the most beautiful resources that God gives us to impart change in this world. Okay. So let's start with that. That means that when I have money dates with my spouse, it's never, ever just about the numbers on the spreadsheet. It always has to start with the values. The conversations always have to start with, oh yes, this is in alignment with what we want. Or if we do this, what value is not going to get supported? Oh my goodness. Are we not going to be paying tuition? But Jewish continuity and Jewish education is so important. So maybe this other expense needs to wait because we would never not do that, right? So we have to have these conversations so that always, and I want to make sure that this is very clear because people often hear me talk about the money date and they say, oh, tomorrow I'm sitting with my husband and I'm asking what's in the 401k. I'm like, no. You're not sitting with your husband asking what's in your retirement account. I need you to start talking about what do you value as a family? What are your independent values? Are they aligned? What was your childhood?
Like spending on having guests.
Yes, exactly. Are we a family who wants to shine in Achnasas Orchim? Then maybe that guest room remodel that we've been pushing off, and yet our kids are having other, the expenses that we see in our numbers for other things in our family. Maybe it's outfits for our children, whatever it might be, right? Nothing wrong with that either. But again, we look at the numbers and we say, you know what? It's not making sense, because really we should be really investing in that guest room, because this is where we want to shine. We want to make sure that our guests are always here and always comfortable. So you see, it always has to boil down. The values is the starter. And what we want to do, which takes a tremendous amount of honesty, is look at our numbers and see, do they align with my values? Meaning, are they advancing my values? If somebody would open my financial statements, would they be able to say, what is important to me? What is this family about?
I love that. I want to highlight that.
Family value, right?
Wow. If somebody would open my financial statement, would they be able to see what my value is? That's brilliant.
Because very often we give lip service to things, and we say, oh yes, I value Jewish continuity. And then we get back to, well, what kind of Jewish schools and Jewish camps are you financing? Oh, not really. But they have every iPad in the planet and every cell phone and right? So then we have to, there has to be this honest reassessment. And again, I'm not saying that this is an easy process, because then when we start getting very clear on what those values are and how we're going to be spending both our time and our money advancing these values, there are going to be shifts that are going to happen in the family. So then we get to the chinuch conversation, right? Then we got to start, it has to start trickling down to the kids, and there's might be resistance to those changes. Just like if a family starts spending Shabbos, right? If the family unit is important, then I should probably see in my financial statements investing in Shabbos, right? It should be in my calendar and it should be in my bank statements. Do you see? So it's never just about the numbers, ever. It all starts with, what are the values of this family and this individual, and what's our personal mission, and how is my money going to be supporting that?
Wow. Now, I know that you have grown and journeyed yourself, originally from Puerto Rico, now in Houston, Texas. Throughout your growth and journey, you spoke a lot about the Jewish values. I would love to hear specifically in which ways Hasidus enhanced your perspective on money, on how you spend. Which Hasidic values do you think really influence you in your entire, I know you have this program, God Wants You to Be Rich and Jewish Money Makeover. So which specific Hasidus values do you think really shapes your view?
Okay. So I'll tell you very clearly, and I think I kind of sort of mentioned it already, but when we approach money from the standpoint of Hasidus, of Chabad Hasidus specifically, we start seeing that money is not an impediment to my service of God, but on the other hand, is exactly what I need to serve God in the world. Because we start understanding that I'm not here to accumulate brownie points so that I could have a great place in the next world. When we understand Hasidus properly, we understand that we're here for a purpose, for a mission to bring godliness into the world. And so everything I do is about service. It's about, what am I doing to make this world a better place? It's not about me. It's about the mission. And in order to fulfill that mission, I need something that God put in the world, and God has in abundance for all of us to fulfill that mission, and that is money. And so therefore, the idea that I should not be engaged with this, and that I shouldn't be concerned with it, and I should let my husband think about it, let my in-laws think about it, I should just, no. Like, I went one time to somebody and I went to give a donation, and the person said, I don't touch the money. Like, what's wrong with the money? So it has the kudos, like, oh, I can touch that. What's wrong with the money? I'm about to give you $1,000 donation. I don't understand. Right? Like, what? Right? No. Thank you. Yes, God, I have so much I could do with this money. Yes, you're entrusting me with this money. Wow. You have such faith in my capabilities. That is so humbling. Like, what a huge responsibility, right? I have a Jewish family and you have these mitzvahs that you've given us that require money, right? I have to have money to have guests in my home, to put on mezuzahs, to buy tefillin for my sons, to pay for Jewish education, to pay for modest clothes. Yes, I'm going to be fulfilling that mission. Let me follow the blueprint of how does one think, speak, and behave with this beautiful resource. So the whole paradigm, it's not about me. It's never about me. It's about what does God want for the world. And I, as an agent of God, as an emissary of God, what does God expect from me right now? Why is he sending this resource my way? What am I supposed to do with it?
Wow. Yael, would you share a little bit more of your story and how you came to doing this financial work?
So I'll tell you, like most things in life, from my own failures and misgivings and challenges, really, I was definitely not brought up with any of this. So I sort of, even though I worked in the field of finance and I had a master's in business, I really was the type of person who ignored and got by with the minimum and made a lot of financial mistakes because, again, Prince Charming was going to come. I did marry Prince Charming. I did marry a wonderful person and we had a wonderful marriage. And guess what happened? There was something called the 2008 recession. And all of a sudden, money became kind of like a sticking point in this relationship. In a way that I wasn't like, I remember I had a conversation with a friend and she said, oh, well, what's like, that's no surprise. Don't you know that money is always the cause of fights and divorce? And I remember I heard that and it was like she lit a fire under me. That was it, because I did not work so hard in my spiritual growth and in finding my partner, my spouse, and building my home to then have like this thing, money, become this like this cause of friction. I was like, something's got to change. And that's when I really started thinking about like, what is off here? And so together, my husband and I really realized that a lot of this financial paradigm that I've just described, a lot of the way we thought and behaved about money have been completely off. Again, like we could understand the financials, and we happen to be that we both came from a finance background. But if we weren't tithing the way Judaism requires, if we weren't communicating about money in an open way where the pursuit of shalom bayis was the most important thing, and therefore, money conversations needed to happen with openness and transparency. If we weren't talking about what those values are and what we really wanted for our family and how we wanted our money to advance those values, then something's going to be off. And if we were saying that we were people who trusted, but we weren't behaving like that at the end of the day, right? And there was some lack of balance between, how much ishtadlus, how much effort, and how much we really trusted. Like, are we really learning bitachon? I remember years ago, before there was like a gate of trust, like as we have it now that we all love and learn whatever. I remember going to my husband and saying, it was back then and during the recession, I said, I don't understand. All these videos from the Rebbe say, go learn Shara bitachon, go learn Shara. I'm like, man, we have to learn this safer. What is this? Right. And so it wasn't even a thing then. Right. But it was like these, like, oh my goodness, there is a Jewish way to develop trust. Like, this is an intellectual exercise so that it comes into the emotion. Like, this is a process. So it's not like, oh yeah, of course we're from people. We have emunah. Oh yeah, we have bitachon. Oh really? Do we learn this constantly, day in and day night, day out? Right. Is this coming? Like when we talk about hashgacha pratis, is it just lip service? Or is it really, really strengthening then how we behave? Like, or are we, oh yeah, hashgacha pratis, and then I'm so nervous, I'm flipping out when my boss doesn't call or my client doesn't call back or whatever? Or do I really handle it out with grace and leave it up to God and understand that God is infinite and God, it doesn't depend on my boss. It doesn't depend on my client. It doesn't depend on my husband. It doesn't depend on the stock market, right? Yesterday, the stock market dropped the day before and people were panicking, right?
I saw you posted, don't panic.
Don't panic. What are we panicking about? Remember, this is just the mechanics. This is just, you do this because God said, I will bless you in all that you do. So therefore, we have to do certain motions in the natural worlds. Yes, you have to invest. Yes, you have to save. Yes, you have to your money dates, right? You have to do these things because that is part of bitachon. if we trust, you have to trust that the same God that said trust, he said do, right? So we have to do. We can't just sit in Puerto Rico with our pina coladas, as I wish I could. It doesn't work like that, right? We have to put a certain amount of effort. So, all these things, it's like, I just remember that only when we started working consciously on it. I remember, okay, we give tzedakah, but this is a recession. We can't really, we don't have, right? And then later on, it was like, oh my gosh, the paradigm is completely wrong. Tzedakah is a beautiful thing, but if the basic is not there, where's our Meister account? Where is that automatic 10% flowing in and flowing out? Oh, we never had a system for that. Oh my goodness. All we have to do is build a system. Amazing. That's all God has told us to do, right? And so we could go by life without realizing that there really is a divine system here. There really is that ensures that the vessel to receive the blessing of Parnasa is a solid vessel where we're really, really working on our trust, where we're really working on the peace at home, where we're really operating and giving in the way that we're supposed to give. All these things are in place and we're constantly working, growing, and our children are seeing that, by the way.
Can you talk for a minute about, you mentioned peace in the home, shalom bayis. How would you navigate or advise someone to navigate when there was a little bit of a difference between what the husband wants or what the wife wants?
Yeah. So I think that's an important question. And I think, look, this is why I'm so passionate about advising everybody that we need scheduled times in our calendar to talk about these things, to talk about our money, because what tends to happen is that we realize that what you just said, oh, he wants something and I want something else. And we only sort of have discussion while I'm bathing a kid and the other one is screaming that they need help with the homework. And so all of a sudden this conversation kind of happens because he realized, well, there's not a big enough line on credit or whatever it is. And then there's this explosion and then there's silence. We never really got to have the conversation. So what we want, this is something that perpetuates, right? It just happens to be that we're always in this reactionary mode. And so what I want to say is, being that shalom is so important and being that we understand that Jewish marriage is the epicenter of everything, right? We have to carve out as a couple the time and the space to have these conversations. We can then build something very important that is called empathy. What do I mean? You said he wants something and I want something. Well, if I've never understood how my husband was raised and what his emotional triggers about money might be, and he's never understood how I was raised and my successes and failures with money and the lessons learned and not learned and what my triggers might be, we're going to have a very hard time communicating. But if we've had these open and really vulnerable conversations, I'm not going to lie, it's an added layer of connection in a marriage. And this is why it's so positive, as scary as it might sound to people. Then of course, I'm not going to understand why there should be a trade-off at a given moment or why I should understand where his perspective is coming from or mine, right? I'll give you a perfect example. I was having a money date with my husband not so long ago, and we were discussing some transfers of certain accounts. And I said something to the effect of, well, you didn't make the transfers, but it was a very sharp comment, right? And my husband gave me a warm smile and said, you remember I'm not your father, right? And that's all he had to do to melt down the tension. It was empathy. He understood why I was triggered by something because we know each other. And I understood that he got me. And so what would have 10 years ago ended up in a whole explosion? Why didn't you allocate the money and you didn't send it here? You didn't send it. We said we were spending here, not there, right? Was like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I became that little girl again. I can trust you. You did the right thing. Yeah, I get it. Right? So we have to start with understanding. Everybody always wants to say, well, what if he doesn't agree and I don't agree? I'm like, of course you're not going to agree, but you don't even know each other. You don't know each other. You have to sit down one day, and this is going to be a series of conversations. It's not in one sitting, and uncover what your money stories are. What do I really believe about money? Oh my gosh, what kind of cassette tape do I have back here? I just say to myself, back here, that I learned from what I saw at home, right? And what is yours? And how do we want that story to be different for the two of us? Do you see what we're doing here? Like, oh my gosh, what a much deeper connection within a couple. And isn't that what Judaism wants from us? Isn't what we want? To build a solid connection and foundation where we know each other like one and we understand each other and we respect each other, but we have to get open and vulnerable in an area that is very emotional. And again, we don't have a paradigm for talking about it because most of us never saw our parents talk openly about this. We don't know how to communicate around this area. But I say, if we want to become the best agents of this resource, we have to understand that we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it with the person who knows us most and that we care about the most. And very often we hear, well, he doesn't want to talk about it, right? And I say, well, we have to start with us, right? So it's like we learn in parenting, like the I statements, right? Like, that makes me feel like, right? So how about we start with, it's so crazy, but I was listening to this podcast and this woman was talking about the money story. And I was like thinking about like can I tell you a little bit of how I was raised with money? Because I never thought about it, but right. And all of a sudden you're sharing something about your childhood or how that kid stole your money when you were 11, right? And that doesn't mean that he's going to open up then and there. But what you've just done, if you've sent a very clear message, it's okay for us to be open.
You're a financial advisor and you spoke a lot about savings and allocating, of course, tzedakah first. But there's a lot about our lifestyle that actually makes no sense.
Right.
And we have values that are not dollar and cents. For example, having a big family, kosher food, tuition. So, if I'm going to live a life like that where Hashem will provide, I might not have money to save. So how would you, how do you as a financial advisor juggle the one hat of financial advisor on the other hand, have faith, have a big family, Hashem will provide, etc.
First of all, there's two different things. There's two different elements to your question. The foundation of the entire financial paradigm has to start with trust. That is the foundation of everything. We're working on that.
So it's not a contradiction, you're saying?
It's not a contradiction. Thing. They're not a contradiction. Okay. So I was a person who actually in the early years of my marriage, I really struggled. You mentioned having the big family. I really struggled. And I have to tell you, and this is what happens when you do a podcast with a friend of yours. You think you're just talking to a friend. I've never shared this publicly, but I'm about to do that. The reason was because what was drilled in my head in my secular upbringing was a big family cost a lot of money. And why would anybody, if you could give your one child a Harvard education, right? Why would you bring other children to the world and give them less than? This is what I grew up with. And so every time I became pregnant, Sarah, I literally hid my pregnancy from my parents till I no longer could. And I had a friend of mine who told me it's almost like you go like this and you hold your breath and you jump. And again, if I'm a person who believes that the divine blueprint is true, then I have to believe it all the way. Meaning, if God told me to keep Shabbos, then I have to understand that opening my store on Shabbos is not going to bring me one more penny. If God told me that in your blueprint, the best thing for you is to have children, not getting to the emotional, those are all nuances that you can talk to your Rav, okay? Then I have to understand that God has enough in the world, plenty to finance what raising those kids will be. So again, if I believe that there is abundance and that God is infinite and that I, as a person who has a piece of infinity and that every time I connect to him, I'm just literally plugging to infinity. I go beyond the natural order. Then I have to actually act on that. Otherwise, I don't really believe it. Then I actually have to close my store on Shabbos. Then I actually have to tithe properly. Then I actually have to call my clients, do what I need to do to every extent, do my marketing, do whatever. And then that's it. If God wants to send the money through that client or through, I don't know, an insurance claim or through an inheritance, he has infinite ways of getting me the money. So I have to leave the how to God always. And I think that's our challenge. It's like we want to get in God's business. The why, I have to be very clear on the why. And the why has always to be, I'm here to serve, right? And then I have to do the what. What is in front of me that God is putting in front of me that now I have to do the mechanics. And then the how is up to God. Now you talked about savings. So what is savings? Savings is just the mechanics. So if there is a system that says I have to tithe first, guess what? God is so brilliant. Do you know that that's the exact system that we use to save and invest? Literally, if we actually were following a tithing system, we would already in us have the habit of how we build the rest of the model, right? We know then that we do the same thing. Okay, so every month, 10% is going into the Meiser account. Guess what? 10% is going to the savings and whatever percent is going to the investment. And then what's left, I use for whatever. And then, of course, we understand that those savings are there to be used and they might need to get tapped. And that's okay. The same way that we filled them once, we're going to refill it again. So it's like we have to get not so emotionally attached to the mechanics, but understand that the motions and the mechanics are part of the system. They're part of the trust. Again, God says, I will bless you in all that you do. So we do have to set up the systems. We do have to work on our habits and build that. But then we don't have to be so emotionally attached because we constantly understand that we are always tapping into infinity and that it's always going to work out for us. And this is daily work. I'm not saying like, oh, you listen to this podcast and now you got it. Now tomorrow I'm tapping to infinity and everything's going to be fine. And then whatever money I need for camp, it's going to be there. Yes, it's going to be there, but only if you're really working on your trust and doing whatever it is. You can't just not call your client and not build them and expect the savings account for camp to get full, right? You always have to be doing both continuously.
Right. And this Yiddishkeit itself says that.
Exactly.
Like you mentioned before, exactly. So wrapping up this podcast, what is your takeaway that you'd want us to walk away? What is your financial perspective? You know, I think your points came across very, very clearly. I loved it. But how would you wrap this up?
I will wrap it up like this. This is an audience of Jewish women. And I think we have to understand that as women, we are literally the strongest influence on our household. It starts with us. So when we are working on our bitachon, again, implementing, like taking from the intellect, learning about it, allowing this to become an emotion, and then our behaviors reflect that emotional stage, this is inevitably going to be the most important thing that your husband needs from you.
Wow.
A husband needs a wife, not a wife that trusts in him. You have to trust in your husband, but not in the way we think. He's not there to save you. A husband needs a wife who trusts in God above, because if she really trusts in God above, the message he gets is, she's always going to be with me. This business issue that I'm having, it's okay. We can get through it because I have a wife who trusts. And so it starts with us. I think we really have to get this part. What I mean by that, it's from the trust to also the allowing the space and the vulnerability with your spouse to happen so that you have that communication and so that you can offer the help and the support. Not that there should be an imbalance of control or power, but rather how can these be completely transparent so that we're both at ease, so that we can both support each other whenever we can. And there might be division of responsibilities, right? But those could change over time. So it really, really, I would like the audience to know that it really starts with us. And evidently, then obviously it transfers down to the children, right? The stronger we are in our trust, the better we're communicating with our husbands, the better our parenting is going to be in this area, in any area.
Wow. Yeah. Would you be open if somebody wants to follow up with asking you a question? Where can they find you?
Of course. I get tons of questions. You can DM me on Instagram. I always respond. Yael Trusch on Instagram. You can also email me, Yael@JewishLatinPrincess, and I always respond to my emails. So yes.
Thank you, Yael. This is out of this world. I really appreciate all your wise words of inspiration. Thanks for sharing from your heart.
Yes.
And hopefully this will impact us, like you said, in our minds and leading to our emotions and then behaviors.
Amen.
Thank you. And hope you're all subscribed to the Optimizing Mother podcast. Please share with your friends and spread the word. Thank you for joining us today.